Lecture 2, The Angels and Demons of Our Better Nature. If you came for a horned villain with a pitchfork, we're in the wrong century, bud. The real danger isn't really a barcode on a neck, it's an operating system in the soul. This lecture argues that Antichrist is not a celebrity tyrant, but a mode of consciousness. Manipulation as default, spectacle as sacrament, control as creed, while Christ consciousness is the stubborn decision to keep virtues online under pressure, truth without theater, mercy without marketing, courage without collateral. First, we clean vocabulary. Ha-Shaitan in Hebrew means accuser, not emperor. Lucifer began his political satire about Babylon's magical king. Demons are parasites, not creators. Antichrist, in John 1 and 2, is a recurring pattern. Denial and counterfeit, not a single headline villain, not a person. Revelation's beast is what happens when state power forgets that it's human. The false prophet is propaganda investments. The mark is just habituation quantified. Now these files all rhyme, but they are not the same, and this mashup often confuses us. The distinctions between them sobers us up. Second, we'll map the chemistry of conscience. We'll map the chemistry of conscience. In the Sephiroth, virtues, and their shadow clip off the husks. Wisdom curdles into cunning, strength into cruelty, beauty into vanity, sovereignty into control. These are forms of good without the proper spirit. This is how institutions slide. Tools, law, media, markets, force, they remain. It's the animating virtue that drains out. That drift is the beast's diet and history's collapse pattern. Third, we name the tell. It's manipulation. When truth becomes content, responsibility becomes optics, mercy becomes PR, and forgiveness becomes leverage, you don't need horns. You need a calendar. The antidote is unglamorous, transparency, humility, accountability, service, because these improve signal fidelity, invite critique, and prevent the expensive spiral of self-deception. Faith is not anti-reason. It's simply keeping virtue online when outcomes become unclear. It's the only strategy that holds past a news cycle. So here's the smell test that frames the entire series and today's lecture. It's important to question the ethos of anyone expounding the logos when their pathos is missing, manufactured, or mercenary. If the logos is leveraged, the pathos plastic, and the ethos in escrow, question the sermon. Christ consciousness doesn't need to sell you anything. Doesn't need your vote. Doesn't need your support. It simply stands, quietly, unaltered, when every incentive says bend. The Antichrist consciousness can't truly explain what it's doing and or on what time frame and how, what techniques, tactics, etc. are really in play, and what is just lip service and what isn't. To divulge the manipulations at play would be the same as giving up the goose. This is telltale. Transparency, humility, honesty, integrity. Those virtues are right because they are helpful. They are light and they are beneficial to progress. It allows for improvements, critiques, to avoid mistakes. When the pride lies in a mode of reality that needs to bend to the perfectly laid plans, instead of reality dictating them, we are running with an Antichrist consciousness. Christ consciousness doesn't ever have such a problem. Now, you say the devil, And half the room pictures a red guy with goat legs and an HR complaint file thicker than Leviticus. Pop culture gave him a makeover. Horns from medieval art, pitchfork from harvest imagery, a smirk courtesy of the devil's advocate, and brand deals from everything from death metal covers to hot sauce to even water. Fun, yes, but fuzzy. If we're going to talk clearly about Antichrist consciousness, we have to do a quick devil detox. So we're going to strip the mascot down, keep the facts, and sort the files. We'll start at the word itself. In Hebrew, it's not a proper name, it's a job title. Ha-Shaitan. The adversary, the accuser. Think prosecutor, not emperor. Of course, he's a lawyer. In the book of Job, Satan appears among the divine council, not running a rival kingdom, but testing a thesis. Does Job fear God for nothing? He is permitted to afflict, not authorized to dethrone. That's an important baseline. The biblical Satan in Job is a function inside the court, not an equal and opposite god of chaos. Later tradition builds him into the cosmic antagonist, but Job's text keeps him on a heavenly visitor's badge. So, shift languages and the costume changes. In Greek, diabolos means slanderer, the one who throws things across your path, accusations, traps, narratives. In the New Testament, he tempts, deceives, and accuses, the trilogy of his brand strategy. But note the role consistency. Adversary by argument, not creator by right. Genesis is serpent. The text never names him Satan. There. That identification arrives much later. Revelation will later fold the serpent, devil, and Satan into one dossier. But the point is, the canon itself shows layers. A serpent who deceives, an accuser who prosecutes, and eventually a dragon who persecutes. One through line with an evolving emphasis. Now to the most abused Latin in the room, Lucifer. That wasn't originally a personal name at all. It's the Vulgate's term for morning star. In Isaiah 14, Hallel ben Shaker. Excuse me if I'm butchering the pronunciation. Taunting a fallen king of Babylon. See, it's political satire before it becomes demonology. Christian tradition later reads the fall imagery typologically, associating it with a primeval angelic fall, and so Lucifer migrates from poetry about tyranny to a proper name for the fallen light bearer. The contrast partner in that tradition is Michael, the warrior archangel, the guardian of Israel in Daniel, the one who did not presume to pronounce a blasphemous judgment in Jude. Commander against the dragon in Revelation 12, Michael is restraint and fidelity. Lucifer, in later usage, is brilliance bent by pride. Two luminous beings, two divergent trajectories. One keeps order by humility. One seeks glory by grasping. That's the key distinction. Demons in the Bible are usually unclean spirits, or daemonia in the Greek. Plural, local, opportunistic. They possess, harass, counterfeit. Jesus drives them out. They recognize his authority before the crowd does. Pop culture inflates them into prestige horror, The Exorcist, Hereditary, franchise universes with better effects than theology, sure. But the biblical profile is much simpler. They're parasites on human misery and fear, not dark deities with independent supply chains. Again, no creators here. Only corruptors, or at least the remnants of corruption in the human spirit. Now the big confusion, the Antichrist. People say the word and immediately imagine a single end times strongman who signs evil legislation in a very expensive suit while comics queue up behind him. The New Testament usage is different. The term Antichrist appears in John 1 and 2, not in Revelation. There, it flags anyone who denies that Jesus is the Christ or that Jesus actually came in the flesh. And John says many antichrists have already come. That's not one celebrity villain. That's a recurring posture, a theological and ethical counterfeit that keeps showing up in new outfits. And you see, it's more based on the word Antichrist. It's not a character. Meanwhile, Revelation gives us the beast, which is imperial power gone into God mode, and the false prophet, religion as a propaganda arm, and plus the dragon behind them. Paul adds the man of lawlessness in chapter 2 of Thessalonians, a figure of revelatory opposition who exalts himself. Over time, popular imagination mashes these files together, the beast, the false prophet, the man of lawlessness, the Antichrist, into one end-of-days CEO. Sure, it makes for great cinema, but a little shaky on the exegesis. So let's sort the contrast plainly. Satan, Shaitan, the Diabolos, is the accuser, the adversary, tempter. He escalates from a prosecutor to a persecutor across the canon. Strategy is deception, accusation, domination, affliction. He's not a creator, a corrupter, a tester of corruption. Lucifer, Isaiah's morning star in the later tradition, is initially a taunt at a Babylonian human tyrant, later a symbol of prideful fall, light turned inward. Foil to this character is Michael, fidelity and restraint under God's authority, humility. Demons, unclean spirits, derivative powers. Think about malware, not a rival operating system. Antichrist, in the John usage, is a type and a spirit already at work. Denial, replacement, counterfeit. Rather than a single inevitable supervillain. The beast and the false prophet in Revelation, these are systems, more so. State power deified, propaganda sanctified, not just a person, but a whole machine of worship and coercion. The man of lawlessness in Thessalonians is hubris in the flesh, exaltation and deception with religious theatrics. Pop culture collapses these into one face with perfect cheekbones and a European accent, usually. Scripture keeps them distinct but rhyming. Pride, deception, coercion, denial of truth, deification of power, spectacle and sacrament. That's why people get confused. We've stapled together a cinematic composite and then tried to read the Bible back through the movie poster. Now, it was a little long-winded, so why does this taxonomy matter for Antichrist consciousness? Because if you treat Antichrist as only a future headline, you'll miss it operating as a present habit, and therefore you'll miss the whole thing. John's warning is a diagnostic. Whenever truth is replaced with narrative, flesh and blood, compassion with abstraction, worship with theatrics, power selling itself as salvation, you're not waiting for the Antichrist. You're already running the firmware. So it doesn't look like a jump scare. It looks more like Monday. And this brings us to the practical hinge of this series. The devil of pop culture is a personality, right? The Antichrist of the epistles is a pattern. Satan and Job test a claim about human faithfulness. The beast in Revelation tests entire economies of allegiance. Demons haunt households. Antichrist, in the biblical sense, haunts institutions, ideologies, and identities as a consciousness. Anywhere a counterfeit Christ, offers control in the place of love, simulation in the place of truth, coercion in the place of conscience. So before we debate Mark of the Beast rumors or cast the Antichrist as whichever politician just annoyed you on cable, we need to clean our lenses a little bit. Because an accuser doesn't equal the beast or a false prophet, and that doesn't equal the Antichrist as a term. Even though frequently they probably collaborate, that's the clarity we need, because in the next movement we're going to talk about how that collaboration recruits us by bending the logos, laundering ethos, and puppeteering pathos until a counterfeit gospel sits on a real throne and calls itself necessary. So let's zoom out here. Strip the horns, but keep the function. The beast in Revelation reads like a menage, but its job description is simple. State power when it forgets that it's human. In John's day, that meant Rome, the imperial cult, eagle standards, bred in circuses with a sword behind the curtain. In any day, it's the same pattern. The apparatus that starts as stewardship and ends as spectacle plus force, demanding loyalty not to law or truth, but to itself. The beast is what happens when the state tries to cosplay as God and refuses to break character. You can recognize the costume changes across eras. Classical collapse? Pretty much. Check the ledger. Militarism becomes normalized. The economy becomes overly financialized. Cynicism becomes mainstream. Truth is outsourced to propaganda. Religion gets hired as PR. Renaissance ideals of human dignity, proportion, restraint are quietly traded for expedience, excess, loyalty, and surveillance. That's the devolution. Man to mechanism, conscience to compliance. The cradle that virtue builds becomes the cradle robbed by panic and power. And then people ask why the lights go out. Apocalypse just means revelation. It's a pulling back of the curtain. Not just the end, but the end of the act when the set pieces burn and the audience can finally see the rigging. Civilizations don't implode because a comet picked Tuesday. They end when the inner architecture, the trust, the truth, restraint, is hollowed out while the facade looks magnificent. Revelation gives you the pattern in mythopoetic ink, a beast, power deified, a false prophet, spin, sanctified, a mark, which is allegiance, quantified. The specifics vary, the logic does not. History keeps on staging the remake. Now switch lenses from public beasts to private blueprints. If you don't understand the Antichrist mind state, you need the map where virtues and vices don't just sit in a list, they travel. And the Qabbalists drew one. On one side, the Sephiroth, the emanations of the divine, wisdom, understanding, beauty, mercy, severity, foundation, sovereignty, and so on. On the underside, you have the clip-off, the husks, the shells left when the spirit of virtue drains out and the shape remains bitter and hollow. So think of a wine, grapes turning into wine, there's your virtue. You leave them alone for too long and they become vinegar. So that's your clip-off. Same grapes, different chemistry. And that's the secret of demons in the serious sense. They're virtues without soul, functions without purpose, habits divorced from heaven, if that makes sense. They act like power, but they feed on you. In that map, angels and archangels aren't cartoon mascots. They're qualities in the proper relation and proportion. Orders of clarity that move you up and through. closer to God. The crucial point is that these aren't static boxes. The tree has paths, so does its shadow. Mercy without discipline eventually bleeds into corruption. Beauty without truth just becomes branding. Discipline without mercy becomes tyranny. Truth without beauty becomes bloodshed. You travel these paths every day, often unintentionally, and institutions do too. That's how a people slide from virtue to husk, long before anyone notices the taste has changed. Now let's read that back into Revelation's politics. A beast is what you get when too many leaders run the clip-off OS at once. Justice without love is cruelty. Strength without humility becomes an obsession with domination. Beauty without goodness just becomes propaganda. Sovereignty without service becomes control. The false prophet is the clip-off's media arm. The pathos engineering dressed as revelation. The mark is just habituation quantified. The things you do so often you forget you chose them, now tracked, scored, and required. And here's why this matters. More than monster hunting, okay? The Sephiroth dispel the clip-off by existing. So when we say Antichrist consciousness, we're not pointing at a single face on a billboard. We're pointing at a cynical operating system that prefers the husks to the fruit. Efficiency over meaning. Compliance over conscience. Whether that's in a palace, a platform, a newsroom, or your private habits at 2 a.m., it sells itself as mature realism. It's just vinegar with the same branding as the wine bottle. So let's say it plainly. All these big spooky words, the devil, beast, the Antichrist, demons, they're all really consciousness terms. They're not collectibles for a theology shelf. They're modes of being. When the scripture sketches beasts and angels, Sephiroth, clip-off, it's giving you a user manual for how consciousness operates in people and in systems. Virtues aren't ideas you admire from a distance. They're live, living processes. They're habits you run. And evil isn't an exotic substance. It's what happens when those processes are absent. So the beast, right? You can read it as beastware. The mode, a state or a platform that boots into the mode, a state or a platform boots into when virtue is offline. So yes, the machine still works. Laws on the books. Budgets are passed. Dashboards are glowing. But the source of action has shifted from conscience to convenience. The same tools, logic, data, rhetoric, force, different animating spirit. All the tools are there, the logic, the data, the rhetoric, and the force are there still. The animating spirit is different. So you start getting policy without mercy, security without any dignity, spectacle without truth. It might look like strength from afar, but up close, you can notice that the virtue is vacated. And this is why the apocalypse shows up on a loop in history. Not because fate loves fireworks, but because civilizations forget what they're there for. The institutions all remain. The titles remain. The protocols remain. The consciousness animating them degrades. Justice becomes procedure. Leadership becomes branding. Debate becomes manipulation. The beast isn't a new animal. It's virtue shell running on low battery. Now, if you've ever looked at the Qabbalistic map, the Sephiroth and their shadow, the Clippa, this is exactly the point. Wisdom as a way of being is a virtue. Cunning is the husk once wisdom's spirit has left. Strength is courage under truth. Cruelty is strength with the heart uninstalled. Beauty is harmony that invites the soul. And vanity is beauty after the soul's already been kicked out. In consciousness terms, demons are the virtue processes in zombie mode. The form without the life. They can do things, they just can't heal anything. Virtue dispels vice because virtue is something and vice is what's missing. Darkness isn't a rival to light. It's the absence of it. Logic, reason, rhetoric, law, media, markets, militaries, these are the chisels and levers of civilization. The headline question is who's holding them and in what state of soul are they in? A court can do justice or it can just as easily launder injustice. A newsroom can inform or it can inflame. A platform can connect or it can corral. The object-level actions might even look identical on paper. The origin point in consciousness is what separates medicine from poison. If you take too much medicine, you can poison yourself. This is where faith stops sounding naive and starts becoming operational wisdom. Faith, at its cleanest, is the commitment to run virtueware even when the outcomes aren't guaranteed or visible. It's the refusal to switch off courage, honesty, patience, chastity, charity, fidelity, prudence, especially when the heat is on and the smart shortcut is winking at you. That's not anti-rational. It's meta-rational. It's seeing that panic and pain are terrible system administrators. To have faith in Jesus, translated into daily practice, is to trust in the Christ mode of consciousness, truthful, merciful, self-giving, and steadfast, as the sane, rational way to live your life when you cannot see the end of it from the middle. You keep the virtue processes running because you know from 10,000 years of human civilization and audits that turning them off in crisis births the beast. Call it theology or call it reliability engineering. The conclusion is the same. Abandoning virtue at the first sign of hardship is absurd. There's a name for that counter virtue, by the way. It's called fortitude. Courage that stays online when your feelings want to pull the plug. So when we diagnose Antichrist consciousness, we are not forecasting a cape and a crown. We are flagging a system default, willful ignorance of virtue accompanied by competent use of every other tool. So expect the rhetoric to be polished, the spreadsheets to be reconciled, the press releases to be exquisite, but also notice when the soul is missing. That's why it reads as apocalypse, because the structures keep moving after the animating meaning has died. Flip side, turn virtue back on, and you don't need a new planet or a new platform. You need a new spirit in the old tools. Wisdom paired to love. Strength yoked to compassion. Beauty wedded to truth. Authority bent to service. If you notice, in certain institutions and organizations, these things are purposefully dissected and kept apart. That's not utopian. You can have the same city, the same court, the same newsroom with different consciousness. It's not utopian. It's maintenance. That's just keeping the lights on so the building doesn't collapse in the dark. Hold that frame. Next, we're going to trace how logos, ethos, and pathos get hijacked when virtue goes offline. How truth becomes content. Character becomes costume, and feeling becomes fuel. And how to restore each to Christ consciousness mode in real institutions without waiting for a miracle or memo. The simple answer for that is to live by the virtues yourself. That's it. All right, so now that we've retired the barcode on the neck mythology, let's look at the thing itself. If Christ consciousness is standing in virtue, even unto death, okay, that's the story, that's the character, that's the example. Truth without fear, mercy without marketing, courage without collateral, then Antichrist consciousness is its inversion, manipulation as a mode of being. Not the occasional white lie, not spin in a pinch. I mean manipulation as the default kernel, the BIOS boot, and the process is controlled by distortion. So what does that look like in practice? Start with a contrast case. The character of Jesus. Okay? It's a teacher, demonstrator, not a puppeteer. He heals without press releases, prays without cameras, tells the truth when it costs him, even to the point of being tortured and murdered. Refuses to outsource consequences to someone weaker. He does not retaliate to save face. He will not shrink, deflect, excuse, lie, exaggerate, or blame conveniently. He doesn't do it in the story. In his world, these aren't suboptimal strategies. They're completely off limits. They're not in the character. If Grace had a dress code, those habits are not allowed in the building. Flip the polarity, and you have the Antichrist consciousness. The same tools remain. The logic, the rhetoric, law, platforms, money, force. But their source is shifted. The new North Star is get what you want by bending reality just enough that people won't notice until you've moved the furniture. So a quick field guide for this, so you can see it. So truth is replaced by content. Not something to live by, something to package up. Accuracy is negotiable, virality is king. And responsibility is replaced by optics. Accountability means, did we control the headline by 5 p.m.? When courage becomes posture, do the bold thing only if there's a net and a narrative, only if it looks good, only if we can spin it. Mercy becomes PR. Compassion is deployed on a schedule, optimized for sentiment graphs and demographics. Forgiveness becomes leverage. We forgive when it preserves leverage, otherwise we retaliate. Once manipulation gets the keys, everything else becomes a department of manipulation. Pride provides the legal cover. We had to do it. We had to do it, or we're going to be hosed. If we don't, they will. Fear provides the fuel.
As you can see, a philosophy starts to bloom that recasts vice as virtue, cynicism as sophistication, ruthlessness as clarity, duplicity as strategy. After a while, the organization forgets there was ever another way to even run the meetings. And this is where the rot really starts to set in, because you don't need cartoon villains at this point. You only need the idea of incentives. Tell a newsroom that it now lives on rage clicks. Tell a campaign it survives on opposition research. Tell a company it's valued by quarterly dopamine. Tell a bureaucracy it will be punished for whistleblowing and rewarded for alignment. No whips, no horns, just dashboards. The outcome is the same. The virtue processes power down. The manipulation processes boot up. The building still hums. And here's the deeper cost. You lose sovereignty. Not the flag kind, but the soul kind. And Actually, now that I think about it, you eventually do lose the flag kind. The minute manipulation is your go-to, you become a hostage to your own narrative maintenance. Every lie needs a handler. Every deflection needs a calendar. Every scapegoat demands a successor. Your day isn't spent doing the good, it's spent defending the story. That's the bombed out consciousness. A person or a group of people, an institution, whose inner city is mostly scaffolding and crime scene tape, insisting that the skyline looks terrific. Worst, manipulation corrodes signal fidelity. The more you use people, the worse your information gets. Subordinates start telling you what keeps them employed. Friends start telling you what keeps the peace. Platforms start telling you what keeps you scrolling. You think you're running the chessboard, but you're playing against your own hallucinations. The Antichrist consciousness calls this vision. The rest of us call it failure. If that feels abstract, just try a few live fire examples. On personal scale, a colleague takes credit strategically, fudges a stat just this once, blames a junior to keep a clean record. They get the promotion. 6 months later, they live in calendar hell because every relationship requires micromanaging of that narrative. They'll call it their own leadership, but it's really just caretaking of a lie. What's lost in that? The organization who promoted him now has a worse leader than they should. Institutional scale now. An agency hides an embarrassing error behind national security and quietly shreds dissenters' reputations to preserve public trust. The trust drops anyway. Now they need more secrecy to manage the trust crisis produced by secrecy. And then on top of that, the culture corrodes to see that that's now acceptable. So now you have debt, not governance. On a cultural scale, let's say a platform optimizes only for engagement, teaching millions to frame disagreement as identity threats. Engagement rises, attention spans collapse, the policy radicalizes by design. Later, the platform declares itself the adult in the room and throttles dissent to protect democracy. The beast smiles because the false prophet just wrote the blog post. Meanwhile, the alternative still exists and still works, and now it's just being clouded by the algorithm that was set in place as a safeguard. The boring heroism of virtue under pressure still works, however. Tell the truth and take the hit. Honor your commitments when no one is watching. Forgive so you don't rot, not so you can preen. Refuse to use people as means even when they're volunteering to be used. None of that is theatrical. All of it is true sovereignty. You are free because you do not need to remember which version of you said what to whom. Let's get diagnostic now. If you want to know which OS you're running, check for these processes. Default to disclosure. When something goes wrong, do you instinctively name it and own it? Or do you first rush to design the alibi? Do you have processes to do this already in place? What's your appetite for consequences? Are you willing to be smaller on paper to be truer in reality? If not, manipulation will rent the spare room. Human primacy. Are people ends or instruments? The answer determines everything else, including your own IQ's usefulness. Do you have a retaliation reflex? Does harm done to you trigger justice or vengeance? Does the harm done to you even need to be unjust for you to seek vengeance? One protects the ecosystem, the other torches it for simply reacting to your own dishonesty. Narrative dependence now. How much energy do you spend cultivating an image versus cultivating your character? And be honest. I mean, you could probably check your calendar because it already knows. Now I can hear the realist in the back saying, isn't some manipulation necessary? People are messy. Sure, strategy exists, discretion exists, so does prudence, so does grace. The virtue of right means toward right ends, but the line is simple. Prudence bends methods to serve the true and the good. Manipulation bends reality to serve the self. This is a consciousness thing. The good of virtue is almost always outside yourself. It's your job to strive for it and bring it in. You know what's right. The first, being prudence, requires judgment. The second requires self-deception. Virtue requires self-honesty and transparency. It would never require self-deception. One sharpens your vision. The other blinds it while complementing your glasses. Notice what this implies about faith. Faith is not believing 5 impossible things before breakfast. It's staying in virtue when the spreadsheet says bail. It's rational because it trusts the long, brutal audit of human history and of human life. Every shortcut costs more later to someone somewhere. Faith says, keep truth online, keep mercy paired to justice, keep courage yoked to humility, keep chastity guarding love from self-consumption, keep patience from turning into passivity, and zeal from turning into cruelty. That's not just piety for piety's sake. That builds system integrity within you and outside of yourself. And pride is the chief evangelist of manipulation because it promises God mode without God likeness. You can control outcomes. You're the exception. Higher morality, lower transparency. Pride lets you retaliate elegantly and call it virtue. It drafts philosophy as cover, hires history for footnotes, and outsources conscience till later. Then it sends you an invoice labeled peace of mind with the total blacked out. You'll pay eventually in full. So yes, Antichrist consciousness can sit on a throne, run a platform, pass a budget, preach a sermon, or text you at 2 a.m. It accepts what Christ will not accept, using people, laundering truth, weaponizing mercy, monetizing awe, outsourcing consequence, and calling fear wisdom. It treats virtue as a liability during storms, then wonders why every forecast says more storms coming. The exit is not glamorous. Shut down the manipulation demons. Turn the virtue processes back on. Tell one hard truth today and take the small loss. Keep a promise no one can audit. Return something you could have kept. Refuse an advantage you could have justified. Forgive quietly without a post. You'll feel smaller for a minute, but you'll get your sovereignty in return. The room gets clearer. The feedback improves. The beast has less to eat. And when the next crisis comes, and it will, your house won't require stagehands. It will only require you, and you will be there, unfragmented. That is what Christ mode looks like in the wild. It's not dramatic. It's not performative. It's stubbornly real. It's how civilizations avoid apocalypse, how households avoid bitterness, and how souls avoid becoming subsidiaries of their own PR. We're going to take this even deeper now and see how manipulation hijacks truth, character, and feeling, the logos, ethos, and pathos, and how to proof institutions against it without abandoning the tools that make them strong. You can spot manipulation mode from across the playground. Kids do it instinctively. They edge away from the classmate who always rewrites the rules mid-game, who never takes a fair loss, who needs a fresh batch of friends every semester because last semester has figured out the trick. Adults pretend it's subtler, but the pattern is the same. The chronically misunderstood operator who sheds teams like snakeskin, forever onboarding the newly impressed because the previously acquainted have quietly downgraded contact to email only. That's not charisma, that's churn. And churn is expensive, socially, institutionally, and spiritually. When manipulation becomes the operating system, self-manipulation is the screensaver. The inner monologue turns into an HR document, constant narrative justifications, daily memos to self about why the latest cut corner was actually foresight, why the latest betrayal was mutual, why the latest exile was a promotion. You wake up each morning fighting to keep the human skin over a lizard's logic. Breathe, smile, appear generous. Remember which version you told which person. The room must be populated with sycophants because honest mirrors are fatal to the brand. Opponents get reclassified as confused, then bad faith, finally dangerous and must be dealt with. Allies degrade in parallel. You don't partner with the trustworthy, you partner with the useful. In these circles, everyone's triggers, traumas, and mistakes become leverage. Chips on a table where no one ever cashes out, only trades up. The deeper you go, the more cross-collateralized your life becomes. 10 people own a little piece of your peace of mind, and you own a little piece of theirs. Decision-making converges on one question: how will this play? And drifts miles away from the only question that ever built anything useful. Is this right? There's a simple way to see why this fails at scale. Run the game theory thought experiment, okay? Country A is led by someone morally upright. Country B is led by someone for whom manipulation is the policy, okay? What is A's strategy if B is willing to harm its own citizens, burn credibility, and salt the earth to preserve their own narrative? Short answer, A must be patient, principled, and prepared. Deterrence plus transparency plus alliance trust. It's harder at first because upright play may constrain certain tactics. You can't lie your way out of yesterday. But you accumulate compounding assets that B simply cannot. Reliable signals, credible commitments, partners who don't need bribes to stay. So that makes for better partners, by the way. Now flip it. Country A is crafty at home, gaming its own people while playing statesman abroad, while country B manipulates everyone. Whose strategy is easier to execute? In the short run, neither. Once manipulation is your native tongue, signal fidelity collapses, your intel degrades, subordinates just end up telling you what keeps them safe. Your partners hedge, they've seen you ghost your own. Your populace discounts your asks, they've seen the fine print. You win a sprint and then trip over your own narrative wiring in the marathon. The beast only looks efficient because it's writing the scoreboard. It hemorrhages trust, the one currency you can't print, and never lets you compare it to anything else other than itself. Swap in a family, or let's just do this. Swap in a family. One parent lives by virtue, under pressure. The other lives by image, under pressure. Which household is calmer during a crisis? The virtuous home takes a reputational hit cleanly and repairs. The manipulative home survives each scandal by redefining reality and spends the next month managing fallout. You could swap in a company here. A principled CEO versus a win at optics CEO. Quarter one, the spin artist may crush it. Quarter four, key talent quietly leaves, vendor terms worsen, regulators sniff inconsistencies, and customers develop a sixth sense for the gap between slogan and service. Swap in a club, a newsroom, a nonprofit, it's the same curve. Manipulation scales only by consuming fresh trust. When the perimeter runs out of people who don't know you yet, the machine stalls. The stall is what older ages called a judgment, and modern analysts call a loss of license to operate. Revelation calls it a beast because by the time collapse is visible, the humanity has already been traded away. This is why the beast functions as a civilizational tell in apocalyptic literature. It's not a meteor, but it's actually a mode, the visible crest of years of quiet corrosion where truth became content, justice became procedure, courage became posture, mercy became PR, and leadership became brand management. It's an omen because it's an outcome. A society that has mistaken cleverness for wisdom and leverage for law eventually can't remember how to do anything. The only thing left in all of the positions becomes to perform, and performances end. The antidote is almost disappointingly plain. You don't out-manipulate manipulators. You make manipulation unprofitable, and eventually it is. And then when it is, you end up in debt. Debt to people less trustworthy than the allies you started with. You end up in debt to the only people who would come to your aid after you've burned every bridge your entire life, and that would be your enemies. Personally, stop feeding people who treat your conscience as a negotiable instrument. Institutionally, design incentives that reward candor, protect dissent, and pair authority to service. Culturally, admire outcomes earned by transparent means, not just the outcomes themselves. In every domain, replace the question, will this play, with will this hold if fully revealed? Will it hold under audit? Will it hold under stress? Will it hold under time? If you take the example of the three little pigs for a child's story, right? I'm willing to bet the house made of straw was the easiest one to build. Right? It's the lightest to move. It's the least amount of work. You know, children can answer that question. Most adults can too. If they're not being paid to pretend otherwise. Yes, everyone can feel it. Even the operator feels it. Hence the need and the constant need for new rooms, new flattery, new enemies to explain why the old audience left. The public obviousness is mercy disguised as embarrassment. It's the world letting you know your mask has slipped one too many times before your soul does. So take the hint. Turn the virtue back on, not because it's cute or quaint, but because it's the only stable strategy in any game longer than a news cycle. The beast is not a prophecy you're doomed to fulfill. It's not the way it's secretly been working for hundreds of years, unless, of course, you mean that it's the inevitable end of civilizations. It's a warning label on a very old product, manipulation. Side effects include isolation, paranoia, brittle victories, and in advanced cases, collapse of civilization. Look at the end of leaderships, especially in losing wars. The image of a certain fascist dictator ending his life in a bunker comes to mind. Think about where he started. Think about where he ended. Was there fire and brimstone surrounding him? You bet. So, use as directed if you want an apocalypse, meaning use the beast if you want an apocalypse. Otherwise, return it to sender. It is always easier to arrange the world so one person, or a very tiny circle of them, benefits than to arrange it so a whole people thrive. That's not insight. That's basic math. When decision-making quietly adopts easier as its ethic, convenience as the policy becomes a concierge service for the few and a compliance regime for everyone else. That's the principal agent problem in a crown public choice theory with a security detail and the tragedy of the commons written as a budget. The short run looks efficient, right? One signature, one favor, one exception. The long run corrodes. Signal fidelity collapses. Truth is now curated, right? Trust decays. Promises are selective. Resilience vanishes. Systems are optimized for a person. For one person, fail the first time reality doesn't care who that person is. That's when the beast appears, not as a monster from beyond, but as a machine that now only knows how to serve its owner. And ruin comes on a schedule, because a nation is complex. It's a complex good that must be tended. A court, a press, a school, a market, a church, a family. Each require virtues to cohere. One man's benefit is simple. The common good is work. When simple keeps winning the tiebreakers, collapse is not an accident. It is the plan, executed lazily. Ethos, logos, and pathos come back into this, right? I'll give you a quick smell test here for you to use. I would say it's important to question the ethos of someone expounding upon the logos when their pathos is missing, manufactured, and possibly mercenary. That's the pun and the point here. Rhetoric isn't three nice Greek words. It's a triangulation device. When lecturers' truths, the logos, arrive, pre-sanded by a PR team, and the feeling, the pathos, is imported, with a string section swelling, the lights dropping at dramatic points, testimonials queued up, talking points laminated, then character, the ethos, isn't really illuminated by the message. The message is being used to launder the ethos, the character of the person. So yes, let's bring this back to the inspiration for this lecture series, 1 Peter Thiel. In the case of Peter Thiel, I think it's more than fair to interrogate the ethos of his series. This is, in part, why this counter-series exists, to provide a comparand. Antichrist consciousness doesn't mind borrowing a chapel when it needs the acoustics. If the target audience is Christian, it will stage a pseudo-Christian lecture. If the heat is on about surveillance or autonomous weapons, it will seek an ethos rinse. If a new market requires moral language, it will borrow the logos of God with a straight face and call it strategy. That is the Antichrist consciousness. But Christ consciousness doesn't need brand partnerships. It doesn't rent a virtue, it lives one. As for that old line, that road to hell is paved with good intentions, let's be honest, the worst roads weren't paved by clumsy do-gooders. They were paved by expensive planners with spare narratives in the trunk. The cruelty is not accidental, it's costed, scheduled, A/B tested, and then when the damage surfaces, retrofitted with a backstory about noble aims. We meant well is not the moral. It's not the moral. It's the alibi. Contrast that with the Christ story. I mean, I think the metaphor plays. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. Jesus, in the story, as a character, does go to hell. Harrowing as redemption, but not as a consequence manager with a press kit. No. He descends because his forgiveness descends. Because love will do the longest commute. The pattern isn't manipulation crowned with a hymn. It's virtue held under torture, prosecution, and death, then given again. That is Christ consciousness. Not rhetoric that performs, but reality that transforms. So let me end where we began, only cleaner. If the logos is leveraged, the pathos is plastic, and the ethos is in escrow, question the sermon. Christ consciousness doesn't need to sell you on anything. It simply stands quietly unaltered when every incentive says bend. Every knee shall bend, every tongue shall confess. The question is, will it be in shame or will it be in shamelessness?